With the beginning of Season 4 of Outlast Trials, we have a whole heap of content to catch up on. It has been a year and a half since our original Outlast Timeline was released, and 10 months since we last did an update for it. So in this video, we'll be breaking down all the new documents that have come out since then, the new comics, newspapers, special in-game events, and everything to catch us up to the current time at the Sinyala facility. Let's get straight into it. In 1899, the head of Kress Chemical, Anton Kress, was at home with his pregnant wife with toxic chemicals that he had brought back home from work. Not a good idea. This would result in his wife's death during the birth of their children. However, the two twins would be horrifically conjoined at birth, seemingly due to the side effects of the chemicals. Years later in 1904, the twins are getting along quite fine, while their father Anton has fallen into alcoholism, leading to the company of Kress Chemical to have falling stock prices. Anton, however, seems to be more focused on his children than his failing company, as we can see that he has been researching anatomical surgeries to possibly separate his conjoined children. The twins continue to grow up throughout the years, as Otto Kress focuses his mind towards politics, while his sister Aurora Kress focuses more on the family business, being incredibly talented in chemistry. Continue to 1917 and Kress Chemical seems to be back on the rise, as the company's shares soar thanks to the newly built Buffalo plant supplying armed forces in World War I. It's throughout the 1920s that the Crest Twins would participate in numerous murders within the Buffalo area, largely due to the response to their rejection in society due to their disfigurement. Their murders would gain the attention of local newspapers, who would give the unknown killer the nickname Buffalo Minotaur. They would indulge in the pleasures afforded to them, whether it be prostitutes or, well, each other. Yep, you heard that right. In 1924, Anton Kress would read about the depraved acts his children were committing in the local newspapers, and even witness the cleanup at the estate. He would wait until Otto and Aurora were asleep before injecting Otto to immobilize him, and he straight up attempts to split his children apart with a handsaw. Thanks to the quick thinking of Aurora, she is able to throw a chemical vial at her father and inject Otto with another chemical substance to allow him to regain his functions again. This is where it gets really brutal. Otto and Aurora cut their father in half with a handsaw in retaliation. Aurora then carefully stitches her father back together, being careful to keep him alive in the process. However, she rotates his halves. His leg is where his arm should be, and his arm is, well, where his leg should be. It's a really bad day to be Anton Kress, as he is now being kept alive by his twisted children for an entire week at this stage. They would eventually dispose of their father by throwing him into the water and watching the show with a few glasses of champagne. The family drama goes deep with this lot. The twins would continue their depravity as they get older, killing more and more people while also managing to restore the good name of Kress Chemical, earning their company the nickname of the Wizards of the Northeast thanks to their breakthroughs. In 1948, Congress would pass a Federal Water Pollution Control Act, largely thanks to Otto and Aurora's empowering of politicians and manipulating the political landscape from the shadows. These new water pollution regulations would help them improve Kress Chemical's business developments even more. On September 12, 1954, a newspaper is printed by the Denver Eagle, stating that the Kress Chemical is now expanding, promising to employ thousands of people in the local area. In 1955, with a conversation between Alice Bradley Avalanos and Jameson Lawler, as they're doing a background check on Hendrik Eastman. Lawler points out how Hendrik's brother Stanley took his own life, and how Hendrik cited Stanley's death as central to his interest in reprogramming, since it was the Korean brainwashing that shattered Stanley's brain and led to what eventually happened. The issue with this story, however, was that Stanley was actually rearguard in accounting and never actually set foot in Korea. Lawler believes that Stanley was likely writing fake stories back home. Avalanos points out that it's still a sad story even if it isn't true, how brainwashing from a foreign menace driving his innocence and beloved brother to an early grave is still useful fiction. She begins laughing, saying how Stanley had 2 prior attempts at his own life that Hendrik wasn't even aware of. Avalanos points out that Stanley was a mess, just like his mother, and how the Eastman mother would actually hide Stanley's attempts from her fragile golden boy Hendrik. It was found in medical records that both brothers had acute localized alopecia until they left home after their mother was yanking patches of their scalp out with their hair. Jameson is surprised how Avalanos found this information out, as she points out that Murkoff's collection department is very thorough, and they are not hampered by the same restrictions that the CIA have. We now jump to 1957 with a letter between Clyde Perry speaking to Alice Avalanos. He sent her a local newspaper clipping from Buffalo, New York, talking about the Buffalo Minotaur. stating that sightings dating back to as late as the 1920s, but the real body count didn't begin stacking up until the 1940s. The police won't even know the full extent of the body count until they finish excavating the Kress estate. Most of these victims are prostitutes, vagrants, and Canadians, and there seems to be quite the cover-up going on. See, the prominence of the Kress family and Kress Chemical's role in the local economy, most of the authorities just want to sweep this whole fiasco under the rug. Clyde believes that with the relationship that Murkoff already has with Kress Chemical, there could be a real valuable opportunity here. Clyde would continue investigating this Buffalo Minotaur figure until the Crest Twins' eventual arrest in 1958, after being found in their home covered in blood after one of their many murders. And due to Kress Chemical's ongoing relationship with Murkoff, and Clyde Perry being impressed by their exploits, he viewed the twins as being an invaluable asset to the Lathe program at the Sindiala facility. So he would use the authorities' willingness to keep this whole situation under wraps to his advantage. See, families as rich as the Cresses are rarely guilty, and Kress Chemical was a huge company that employed thousands of people. If the news came out that Otto and Aurora, the two heads of Kress Chemical, were the actual Buffalo Minotaur, it would destroy the whole chemical supply chain and put thousands of people out of jobs. So instead, they would pin these murders on the Kress estate groundskeeper. Murkoff would reach out to Clyde Tolson, an FBI agent, that spoke with J. Edgar Hoover and made a deal. Murkoff would help cover up the mess in exchange for Otto and Aurora to be used in their chemical research and development division. We see a patient report written by Dr. Eastman about a Henrietta Grubs, known as Reagent 0985 in the trials. Her therapeutic salvage initiative was a failure, but it provides some background information. Grubs' participation in Project Lathe diminished significantly following romantic relations with a fellow Reagent 0486. Murkoff would increase her hormone and sleep therapy as a result. This would lead to Grubs having erratic behaviours during the trials, and would sustain fatal injuries including 17 fractures, a ruptured spleen, collapsed lung, and internal bleeding. Following this period of unlikely survival, Grubs was viewed as a good candidate for therapeutic salvage, to become a part of experimental population. Her reaction to hormone baths and bone extension was viewed as remarkable, and would later be reintroduced into the trial environment as a heavy X-pop. This wasn't without its issues, however. The lingering effects of Project Lathe and the remnants of her relationship with Reagent 0486 would leave a heavy impression on her psyche. She was uncontrollable, and not susceptible to the charisma of these prime assets. She would go on to attack her prime asset, this being Leland Coyle, and it would prove to be a very bad idea. Coyle would fatally wound Grubs, and she would later be deposited into the biohazard disposal shuttle where survival was deemed practically impossible. Eastman would then close the file on Reagent 0985. Do you remember how Murkoff had a partnership with Liberty Meat Hauling? Well, it just got even better for them. There has now been another unanticipated saving opportunity. Murkoff has purchased 24 at-scale industrial meat grinders, capable of reducing meat, tallow, and bone into a liquid consistency of a paste. Essentially, it can turn people into people soup. This would help present almost zero hazard of bodies being discovered or forensic revelation, which could happen if they go down the whole mass desert burial route. And as such, we now have a new term coined, a slurry burial. Will now replace Murkoff's more complicated disposal process in the biohazard disposal facility. This will save more money in the long run and have less sicknesses and injuries to staff. We now have an interrogation of Reagent 1733. It turns out that 1733 has been writing on the walls of their cell, and the scientist interviewing them is curious what the words that they're writing mean, wondering if it's even a poem. See, Eastman allows reagents the freedom of self-expression to see how the therapy is affecting them. How generous of them. The scientists ask 1733 what they think of regret. They respond that they think that regret is a good thing. You shouldn't avoid regret, because it just means that you could have made another choice. If you have regret, then you have free will. The scientist is curious who she is. Who says these things? 1733 refers to her as a friend and is not initially willing to say anything, but after what is seemingly some persuasion, they eventually give a name. Amelia. 1733 pleads to not let anyone know what they just said, saying that they are secret friends. The scientist asks what greed means to them, with 1733 stating that greed is weakness. If you know what someone is greedy for, then you know how to beat them. The scientist points out that that also sounds like Amelia talking, with 1733 pointing out that Amelia got that thinking from Jesus and Gandhi. Another word that is written was everyone, which correlates with the prophet Moses. He could have just saved himself, but instead he saved everyone. We get to see that there has been an increase in volume of outgoing biohazards during Project Countdown. With all these projects, these reagents are going through absolute hell. The cleanup crew has even requested more resources for loading and unloading shuttles. A note is sent out to the Project Lathe staff on the 25th of January, stating that all staff should exercise caution in observing reagents transiting the trial environments. Staff members may accumulate trace amounts of psychoactives in their system after exposure. They will literally get secondhand highs from these shuttles, and it's not the fun kind of high, since the stimulus inside the shuttle may have negative psychological and behavioral impacts on people. They will now have an observational blackout period during their heaviest stage of reagent preconditioning. And a nice little note here at the bottom, which I'm sure will put all the staff at ease, that any staff significantly compromised by the collateral psychosis can be considered for expop. Oh god. You know all of these extra bodies from the reagents dying in the new programs? Well, it turns out that the cleanup crew now want more money. Scarfiotti thinks that you could also double their pay, and the top brass wouldn't even notice since the slice of the budget that they have is just so minuscule. Avalanos points out to him that the budget is locked and they'll just have to wait a few months. The issue is, cleanup is not wrong here. It is a complete mess. Tuberculosis and hepatitis rates are going through the roof, and the chum bucket is having to be used 2 or 3 times. First of all, imagine having to clean up dead bodies, and most likely contracting TB or hepatitis while doing so, and also being one of the lowest paid employees of Murkoff. Life is not fair. If you thought the idea of a chum bucket sounded disgusting, well, you would be right. It is the nickname for the biohazard disposal shuttle, and while there is plenty of room in the desert to bury the bodies, they need more hands processing these said bodies. Avalanos reminds him that the budget is locked and that they'll just have to make do with what they have. That doesn't mean, however, that the cleanup crews can't have more help. Management decides that staff will now be assisted by reagents with collecting biohazard before it can accumulate, and these reagents will be rewarded for gathering the biohazard as a sub-project for their therapy. Reagents are still, however, not allowed anywhere near the biohazard disposal shuttles. Our next document comes in the form of a classification guideline for a new type of archetype of expop within the trials, this time named the Molotov. They have been encouraged to improvise fire bombs and each carry a 6-gallon gasoline tank. They wear a face mask which includes high-pressure nozzles that allow them to spit flame and discourages ingesting fuel. They're unable to speak due to the damages of their larynx due to previous drinking of said gasoline. I feel like it would damage more than just the larynx. You know what, these doctors need to check my guy's stomach while they're at it, and his brain. And kidneys. You know what, actually just check everything. The individuals revealed in interviews to have a fixation on napalm and other incendiary technologies, as well as potentially being responsible for thousands, if not tens of thousands, of civilian deaths during war. In general terms, they essentially believe they are fire gods and show gratitude for any kind of pain caused by burns. While this particular event is hard to pinpoint time-wise, we do know that it occurs prior to this point. Gooseberry is up to her old ways, teaching the reagents about the rules of the trials. See, if you break the rules, then Mother has to break you, but sometimes the rules change. You can see a reagent escaping Gooseberry's trial through the prime asset elevator, something that shouldn't even be possible. We have an internal letter to staff talking about a discrepancy within a trial. It mentions how 4 reagents entered the dock environment at April 11th at 10:58 PM, and at 11:49, 3 reagents exited the trial and proceeded through their evaluation corridor. The issue with this is the fact that no additional corpses were reported by the cleanup crew inside the dock environment. At first, it could have been linked to a likely explosive destruction of the 4th reagent's corpse, since it was during Project Countdown that this happened, but previous reagents that exploded left hands, feet, and large skull fragments, which this one did not. To make things even more odd, the cleanup crew also found an unconscious pusher expop that was discovered without his gas mask. We have another letter sent by Clyde Perry to Alice Avalanos, talking about the group of reagents that went into the dock trial and the discrepancies. 3 of the 4 reagents involved in the trial have been erased from the records, while the only one who initiated the trial, Reagent 0741, has been identified and moved aside for interrogation. They were unable to get any relevant information from the unconscious pusher expop about the whole situation, but most concerning of all was that there was evidence that reagents had been outside the boundaries of the trial environments. Bare footprints were observed near the X-Pop insertion gate, and there were also mechanical and electrical vandalism found with components missing and removed. Clyde recommends an immediate investigation into this matter. The interrogations of the reagents present at the time of escape have been ultimately unsuccessful, as all of them insist that they only went to the trial with 3 people, not 4. Clyde wonders if the base level suffering of reagents at Sinyala could be undercutting the effectiveness of torture as a tool of interrogation. As you can imagine, this whole revelation has Peeps and Murkoff a little concerned. Eastman and Avellanos convene to talk about the dock trial discrepancies. Avellanos has restricted knowledge of the incident just to herself, Perry, Eastman, and a few select security personnel, not wanting this to reach the higher-ups of Murkoff. She is worried since it won't just be the budget that could be affected. The Lathe program is not the only thing happening at Sinyala, and the security implications and blame that this could cause would be less than ideal for the crew here. She wanted to speak with Eastman specifically, since whoever this lab rat is was ultimately trained by Eastman, so he should know how they think. He is obviously quite stressed, but asked to speak with Scarfiotti since he would know the weakest points of the trial perimeters. We have Eastman hitting his journal once again. Whenever something stressful happens, you can count on old Eastman to pull out the pen and paper and get writing. He is struggling to write due to his hands shaking, believing that he needs to cut down on the bennies. There has been no progress on the escaped reagent, but Reagent 0877 has been observing the others and leaking information back to Eastman. Apparently, escape rumors have been circulating for weeks within the sleep room. This annoys Eastman, since he's supposed to own these people's dreams, wondering how they could keep such information from him. He points out that Clyde has been keeping him distanced from the initial interrogation, and feels that he could be losing control. He quotes a line from an early interview with Leland Coyle, saying how he doesn't care about control and that he just wants authority. But this makes Eastman wonder, can you have authority over yourself without control? Maybe he shouldn't worry about it too much. He continues into another journal entry saying that he has finally remembered the name of the rat within the walls. While Perry couldn't break their co-conspirators with electrodes and steel skewers, he reminded himself that he now owns these people's dreams. He cleaned them up, returned them to their cells, and drugged them for their usual paralytic trauma therapy. That's when 0741 spoke the name of Amelia. He wasn't able to get much information from him given the state during the therapy, but he did get some useful information. He regarded Amelia as some kind of prophet, and when Eastman questioned the other reagents, he got the same name for his little escaped lab rat. He can't manually check the records since it would be incredibly time consuming with just the first name, but he is unsure who he can even talk to. Who can he even trust? He doesn't think there's anyone. 3 whole days Amelia has been in the walls. When will she make a break for it? A conversation is had between Cornelius Noakes and Moses Scarfiotti. Scarfiotti is asking Noakes about a radio that was found in one of the trials, since everything placed in there is carefully done for maximum psychological impact. However, they never placed this radio, and scientists have been observing odd static emanating from within with a recorded message. Noakes points out that the entire place is falling apart, but is quickly interrupted as Scarfiotti points out that Noakes removed the radio from the trial before security had a chance to remove it themselves. Noakes is also quick to point out that he fixes up a lot of stuff. He can't remember every single radio that comes through his shop. Scarfiotti tells him that the radio was sabotaged, and when security found that radio inside of his shop, it was completely disassembled and its recording tape burnt. Noakes reminds him that if something is too busted to use, he just breaks it up for parts. Nothing unusual, since he has to work with what he has. Scarfiotti also reminds Noakes that he isn't irreplaceable, and once again questions him on the tape being burnt. Noakes asks why anybody does anything in this place. I feel like Noakes would make a great politician with the deflection skills on display here. It's also hard to pinpoint the moment that this occurs, but it would be roughly around this current time frame. We can see in the motion comics Noakes working as he always does, as he receives a message mentioning a part number 148. He places the part into an ESOP and gives it to a reagent. He thinks to himself how when you work for Murkoff, it's very easy to just give up hope, to lie to the reagents that they're not just throwing their life away. But now it seems that he could actually be telling the truth, showing that he is working with Amelia, and her plan gives him hope. Eastman and Avellanos have a meeting as Avellanos goes on to say that she has had the girls in research look into their records for this Amelia. Turns out there were 2 hits. 3 months ago, Reagent 1733 was interrogated after mutilating a corpse and mentioned the name Amelia. Eastman is a little erratic and admits that he doesn't sleep all that well down here in this underground facility. There isn't really days or nights down here. He points out these 3 words that were written on the walls: everyone, greed and regret. He wonders if it is possibly a trigger phrase, but there was an even earlier interview with this same Reagent, showing that 1733 clearly knew who Amelia was. If we remember, 1733 was eventually fatally injured by an X-Pop and died as a result, so that is unfortunately a dead end for Eastman. But they agree to interrogate Doris instead, with Avellanos recommending that he tell Clyde Perry about this whole situation, but Eastman insists that Clyde cannot hurt Doris. We now see a conversation between Clyde Perry and Eastman. Eastman once again reminds him to take it easy on Doris. You can scare her, but do not hurt her. Perry says that he will simply just talk to her and then mentions that a name keeps coming up, especially in connection with Doris, before asking if Eastman knows a Henrietta. He believes that she may have some connection to this Amelia, and that Henrietta vanished but nobody saw her actually die. Eastman tells him that that's a dead end. She is extremely dead and was a sexual deviant after getting into a romantic situation with Doris for a while. Henrietta doesn't matter. Perry wants to use Henrietta as a wedge in the interrogation, since she clearly cares about her, but Eastman tells him again to leave it. He doesn't want Perry to really hurt Doris. The following day, on the 17th of April, the interrogation of Reagent 0486, aka Doris Ritter, takes place. This is where we can get into our next comic book entry, as we get a look into the mind of Clyde Perry. He thinks about what the Signala facility truly is. It's a machine that eats bums, addicts and communists, and craps out killers or corpses. There was supposed to be no way out, but somehow a little nobody managed to slip through the cracks: Amelia. Perry has been retired from the field, resigned to suppress or corrupt any leaked information from Signala, and now his job is to find this Amelia hiding somewhere within the facility. Perry empties out the sleep room cafeteria and approaches Doris. She tells him that she doesn't know anything, but she wouldn't squeal even if she did. He points out how Doris hasn't seen the inside of a trial environment for years, and how he's impressed. The system that she has, the bribes, the threats, the blackmail, he doubts there's anything that could go on within Signala that she doesn't know about. Well, except Perry, since he's new here. He begins interrogating her with the help of a hungry patient of his. It doesn't take long before Doris spills Amelia's last name, Collier. Her name is Amelia Collier. The rumor was she was looking for her partner, some guy. Clyde looks through the records, finding this Amelia Collier, Reagent 2427. Born in Rockford, Illinois, June 3, 1934. She was born to a prostitute that either died or left early in her life, and she was taken and raised by a pimp who died in a suspicious car accident when Amelia was 13 years old. Amelia would get arrested a few times, a misdemeanor fraud and some car theft. But what's odd is that she obtained 2 sets of entrance papers at the Murkoff Charitable Outreach Center. She left halfway through her interview the first time around. Her processing agent noted several insistent questions about another volunteer named Damon Green. 3 days later, she would go back to the same outreach center, volunteering for the therapy, and was then shipped off to Signala. Clyde requests the file on this Damon Green, after realizing that Amelia had checked herself into this entire thing since she was actually looking for someone. Perry requests a private meeting between himself and Eastman since he doesn't feel communication within the internal memo is secure. He has had an unsettling experience of finding his own words on secret files left scattered around the trial environments. In other words, the very files that we're reading right now. But he feels that he has identified the source of the leak and, more importantly, Amelia's last name. April 17th would prove to be a very busy day at the Signala facility, with numerous files dated on this day. Eastman is writing again, which you know means something's bad. He states how the Italian's fingerprints are everywhere. Amelia's co-conspirators mention him by his name, Moses, not to mention his connection to Doris. Eastman believes that Scarfiotti wants to destroy him. There were cracks in the mirrors, or vines, tendrils of fungus. He even goes on to talk about desert millipedes, and how Scarfiotti has been setting him up for months or even years. He must accept the terrifying fact that Amelia has not left the facility. Not because she can't escape, but because Scarfiotti wants her to stay. Avellanos and Clyde Perry have a discussion. Perry begins by stating how Eastman is not alright. Bit of an understatement there, Perry. He states that this is not a time to be hiding. He pulls out a file, Amelia Collier, Reagent 2427, and gives them to Avellanos. saying to hold on to them closely since he doesn't want them within the trials. He is worried, since the last thing they need is reagents attempting to escape the trial environment, but Evelanos assures him that he doesn't need to worry. She looks over the file and notes on Amelia and sees her arrest record, but Perry calls her a grifter, just like her grifter father. He mentions her father's history and explains how she didn't sign up for herself, instead she was looking for her boyfriend, Damon Green. Perry has already acquired his file, and has moved him into an interrogation room that he plans on visiting after this meeting. Evelanos points out that Green seems to be a model citizen, wondering how he could end up with someone crooked like Amelia, but it turns out that Green has an issue with alcohol addiction, something that she jokes about, saying how the Lathe program should have cured him of that at the very least. We now head back into the comics as Clyde interrogates Damon, telling him that Amelia followed him into the trials. Damon is shocked and is very worried about her. Clyde tells him that they were in separate sleep rooms, so there was no way that she would have ever found him. But now, Damon will tell Perry everything that he knows about Amelia, starting with how she could have escaped. Damon refuses to tell him anything, but Perry loves a challenge. Damon reminds Perry that torture doesn't mean anything in a place like this, and tells him that Amelia would have her mind on tearing this place down to the ground. He suspects that it's likely too late already. He wouldn't be surprised if she's watching the two of them at this very moment. Perry smiles, saying how Amelia sounds like one hell of a woman, stating just how much Amelia must have loved him in order to follow him into a place like this. He asks Damon how the people of Illinois thought of the two being together, before stating that it's a crappy world out there, but anything is justifiable if it gives us a shot and improves our chances at a brighter future. He wonders if Amelia really could be watching right now, believing that she doesn't sound like someone that would just watch on when someone that she loves was in pain, so it's time to flush her out. Yikes. For all of you that hate the thought of anything eye-related, I apologize. Perry kills Damon with this interrogation, and what would be a horrendous death. I mean, even the cleanup crew is sighing after seeing the mess that he just left. Just to show off how twisted Perry actually is, he orders the waste disposal shuttle to pick up Damon's corpse, still left with the needles that Perry stuck him with. He is then dumped into the disposal area in the hopes that Amelia can see what he did to her precious Damon. Amelia can be seen in this hellhole that is the biohazard area. She mentions how everything down here wants to kill you and everything is broken, everything is dangerous. She finds a part near the equipment harvester, part 148, scavenged from the reagent the Noakes gave the ESOP to. This was the part that she asked him to place inside. She will make it work and she will make it hurt. It's time to get to work. We see in the motion comics as Clyde Perry questions the pusher about the incident, getting nothing of note. He speaks about how he is who Murkoff calls when their curiosity outruns their prudence. The prisoners and torture victims scratch marks on the walls to tally their days, but Perry quickly realizes this isn't a tally, it's a countdown. Sometimes you have to do something painful to survive. Amelia gets the harvester working again, presumably with the part that she smuggled through Noakes, using the dummy that she had obtained in the Gooseberry trial to test the harvester for escape. This will hurt, but this will work. We're almost ready. The very same day, Eastman sends a request out to the supervising staff, stating that in light of recent security breaches, all Murkoff documentation discovered within the trial environments must be carbon copied to his personal office. Any attempt to withhold information from Eastman, especially originating from Scarfiotti, Evelanos or Perry, must be reported immediately, and failure would result in extreme prejudice. We also get a little update about the Crest Twin situation within the R&D department of Murkoff. Dr. Jun Kusamura writes to Eastman, telling him that the results from their repetition of the toxic shock program inspired by their consultants from Kress Chemical displayed possibilities that he found enormously provocative. He strongly recommends authorizing the Kress's request for more materials, regardless of budget. He has not been so strongly aroused by scientific possibility in years. Ugh, odd way to say that you're excited, but okay. Finally, Evelanos and Lawler speak to one another. Turns out Lawler is in Morocco, since the Africa situation is getting out of hand, and they will have a dozen brand new nations by the end of summer. They are offering their partners some assistance, but might need Murkoff's help. He points out that the CIA are interested in the mines. They have surveying showing uranium iodes that have potential to be incredible. This is their chance to outpace the Soviets and to expect a call from state security. This was not the only thing that the CIA had involvement in Africa. During 1960, this was their Cold War strategy. The CIA were trying to promote pro-Western leadership in the region, as well as counter-Soviet influence. They also established a Moroccan intelligence service during this time, known as the CAB-1 or CAB-1, but later known as the General Directorate of Territorial Surveillance. The more you know. We finally head into our next day here on the 18th with yet another journal entry from Eastman. It is noted that his handwriting is erratic, and to say that Eastman is angry is a bit of an understatement. He states that false stories are being planted. Of course, Murkoff would engineer fiction to manipulate his behavior. Without his wife leaving him, or if his brother's death doesn't mean something, then he has nothing to do but make the world for Murkoff. He believes Murkoff made his brother end his own life. As the only possible reason. He begins scribbling erratically, talking about how nothing makes sense and that he is out of control. Total lies means total control. He even draws a dandelion. And it seems like old Eastman is becoming just as messed up mentally as his precious reagents. It's fitting, really. It's meeting galore as Alice Avellanos meets with Clyde Perry. Perry points out that Eastman has been sleeping in his office and pissing in the potted plants. Ooh. Not to mention that Perry is supposed to be reporting to him at this very moment. Avellanos states that it is the worst possible time for Eastman's fragile mental breakdown. Apparently, Eastman has been hoarding gin and amphetamines, not to mention not eating anything else. Avellanos points out that Eastman has always done that. He's been poisoning himself this entire time and his liver likely looks like roadkill. But it doesn't worry her, since Kermit Roosevelt was blind drunk during his entire Iranian coup, and Gottlieb lives with his brain in the cookie jar. Clandestine activities tend to benefit from substance abuse. Perry asks the big question. How bad does it have to get before Eastman is given a enforced vacation? Avellanos states that she's handling it, and that they need to tell Scarfiotti about Amelia, and how he only believes it's a matter of malfunctioning radios at this current moment. The meetings don't end there. Avellanos and Kusamura meet as Kusamura is troubled by Eastman's recent silence. Remember, Kusamura reached out to Eastman earlier about Kress Chemical. Avellanos assures him that everything is under control and they will return to chemical testing when it's appropriate. Kusamura believes that there is an urgent opportunity regarding the Kress chemical process which could draw more funding from Los Alamos. Avellanos isn't convinced, saying that there is bigger fish to fry right at this second. Kusamura states that if Eastman is not available, perhaps someone with more authority could. Avellanos interrupts him, asking him what the hell is that even supposed to mean before telling him that they have an urgent concern, and that is above his security clearance. The next day, Avellanos, Moses Scarfiotti and Clyde Perry meet to discuss the escape. They fill Scarfiotti in with the radio and tell him that they believe somebody inside Murkoff is helping Amelia. He gets a little heated at the accusation that he could possibly be the person responsible, since he was so late to find all of this out. But Perry quickly shuts that down, saying that he has a lead on who it might actually be. Scarfiotti is quick to try and put the blame on Eastman, saying that it is his fault, but Avellanos tells him to cool it, mentioning how they now need increased security inside the trial environments. Scarfiotti recommends cameras since it doesn't really affect the budget and should be easy to swing by the higher ups, but unfortunately cameras require people to be watching them 24/7, which Avellanos points out. Scarfiotti though feels that motion sensors that somehow trigger an electrical shock through the reagent's ESOP should be sufficient. Realistically, they could even make it lethal, since it's only a number on the dial. Damn, Scarfiotti is more cold-hearted than I expected. But then again, he is a Murkoff employee, so I shouldn't really be surprised in hindsight. Avellanos wants Amelia alive, so they can make an example out of her. So if they decided to do it, it would only be enough to shock them and knock them out, not lethal. Scarfiotti is not convinced that Amelia even still has her ESOP on her chest, but Avellanos believes that it would be impossible for her to even get it off without bone saws and spud wrenches. On the 21st of April, there is an emergency alert sent to all Murkoff staff explaining that an unknown amount of reagents have escaped into the Sindiala facility. Lethal force is now permitted and the entire facility is in lockdown. We see another meeting between Scarfiotti, Perry and Avellanos, again talking about the mess that they now have found themselves in. Scarfiotti and Perry actually get into a scuffle as they both blame each other for the situation. Avellanos breaks it up and tells them that they need to somehow stop the bleeding. However, there is a big problem. They cannot interrupt the trials without alerting the board. Also, shuttle operation is automated. Plus, the junkie Eastman has all the punch cards in his office, which have been barricaded for days now. Avellanos mentions that Scarfiotti built this damn place, and they need Eastman right now. Clyde Perry sends a report back to Alice Avellanos the same day explaining that at 9 AM in the morning, himself, Scarfiotti, and a bunch of Murkoff security broke into Eastman's office. They found him completely nude and covered in blood and excrement, both believed to be his own. Damn, not a good look there, Eastman. Can't wait to see the journal entry explaining this embarrassing mess. His pupils were enormously dilated and having multiple lacerations to both his face and scalp. He was talking about the sun, the Skinner Man, and somebody named Joel in a pillar of smoke. They had to restrain him as he began foaming from the mouth and seizing up. God damn, Eastman. They now have him restrained in a hospital bed upstairs. The next day, Avellanos tells Perry that they may have to speak to the board now, since there isn't really any way to avoid it. They have lost too many reagents and security doing this whole recovery mission. Perry believes that the board will shut them down, but Avellanos laughs this off, saying that the sheer amount of money that the facility is bringing in, there is no way that they would shut this down. Not to mention, Murkoff hardly minds a little mess. Perry suggests finding out who authorized the new switching stations for the escalation therapy back in January, giving them a guilty party that they can essentially send the blame train on if Murkoff wants somebody dealt with for this mess. Avellanos wants Amelia to continue to be the top priority, and offers Perry a huge promotion if he is able to fix this entire mess. Avellanos meets with Eastman in the Sinala facility infirmary. Eastman tells her that he needed time and he isn't crazy, saying how she just lied to him about his brother and wife, and now they're lying about his work, about the therapy. She tells him that no one thinks he's crazy, but she is unwilling to undo the straps, saying that he needs some rest. But first, she wants to know where she can find the punch cards for the shuttle system. Eastman hits her with a good old bargaining chip, release him, and the punch cards are hers, stating that he knows exactly how bad things have gotten, and also knows that Avellanos is a political animal. Both her and Scarfiotti think that they can put the blame on Eastman for this entire situation, like he doesn't know about Scarfiotti's extracurriculars or Avellanos' secret romance with Lawler, the CIA agent. If he goes down, Avellanos goes down with him, finally telling her once again to unfasten the straps. The staff are notified that the board has officially authorized program surveillance. Cleanup crews are now required to ID every single corpse during the surveillance until further notice. The next day we get another Eastman journal entry. Oh hell yeah, I was waiting for this juicy update. He feels that he has been cleansed, as if by fire and bleach. He has been as much a patient as a doctor, and needed to be annihilated. Joel 2:30, wonders in the sky and on earth, blood, fire, and columns of smoke. This is a Bible verse, if you're wondering. His families, born and found, are now both gone. His life work is shambles. His chosen children, the reagents, try to escape from him. Everyone is against him. He is nothing but a scorched shadow on the wall where a man used to be. He is that column of smoke. He now feels focused. If he can be so thoroughly destroyed and still live, then he can do anything. Nothing matters anymore. Anything is possible and permitted. These trials will only be the beginning. Damn, feels to me like those psychedelics that Eastman had really gave him a new perspective on life. Still as nuts as ever, but now a more enlightened nut. Avellanos lets Lawler know that he will need to delay his trip to Sinala. But Lawler points out that Gottlieb is expecting a report on the Crest chemical developments. Avellanos informs him that they have been put on hold as Kusamura is back at Los Alamos, and Lawler will not be needed at the moment. Lawler tells her that he's been really looking forward to their planned conferences. Yeah, nice code word, dude. Avellanos tells him that they need to be careful about what they're doing for a little bit, which piques Lawler's curiosity, asking what's going on. She tells him that she will tell him someday or he'll read about it in the papers. We truly are blessed. Eastman graces us once again with his journal writings. He mentions that he's still buzzing and that he had to clear his head. He took a chance with the Crest concoction and he is very pleased. He has used bufotenins before, but this Crest formula is distilled from the urine of schizophrenics. I'm sorry, beg your pardon? It has a potency that he has never experienced before. Wait, hold up. I am certainly no chemist, but a mental disorder does not give you a magical drug urine. The hell am I reading right now? He starts his drug talk again, saying how he saw the sky through a dozen layers of concrete, and he saw space through that sky, and how geometries restructured the vines or something. This dude is tripping major balls. He is now set on finding Amelia, since if he believes, he can make it so. This is roughly the time where you as a reagent can attempt to escape. We follow Amelia's plan, finding ourselves in the chum bucket as we heard about earlier in the documents. It's about as gross as you would think. Amelia speaks to us over the radio left inside and tells us that we will now be dumped off into the one place that is so ungodly awful that Murkoff doesn't even monitor it. Biohazard. The shuttle stops early, but we're able to get off this tuberculosis and hepatitis trap. It's pretty amazing getting to see the behind the scenes of the Siniala facility. The reagents now fill the hallways that were once only accessible to the staff, as many of these rooms are now ransacked and abandoned. Amelia has left messages on the walls to guide the reagents as we find a reagent equipment harvester. This is where the bodies are dumped, later moved into the machine, and have their equipment salvaged for the next up-and-coming reagents. We need to repower this harvester since Amelia is certain that it is the only way out of this hellhole. Damn, you would think that Murkoff would at least hire some maids or something. A janitor, perhaps? Health and safety would have a fit if they saw the state of this place. We head into the tunnels, turning the valves on and return pressure to the pipes for the harvester. Now we only need fuel. We find our fuel canister and restart the power. Now, there is only one thing left to do, head into the harvester and hope that we don't get dismantled into small little pieces. We hear screams as the machine rips the rig and night vision goggles from our person before throwing us down into a pit filled with bodies. The fact that these just continue to stay here really shows that Murkoff doesn't have a very good system in place. No wonder so many of their cleanup crew got sick. We can see reagents feasting on some of the corpses, and even hiding in the walls. It's a really welcoming place, but at least unlike the trials, the end of this horror ride is the exit. As we continue through, we can find a woman eating more corpses. This is Henrietta Grubs, the reagent thought dead after attacking Leland Coyle, surviving eating all of the dead reagents. Holy crap. I really hope we don't have any cuts, since we need to wade through this pretty dirty water under the facility. There are even rats swimming around in here like it's their damn pool. We managed to arrive at the opening, filled with props that have not been used in the trial environments, essentially a garbage heap. It seems that both staff and reagents have not done very well down here, judging by the giant piles of corpses and bones. We take a key on the ground as Henrietta Grubs has now joined us. There is a vault door that needs to be repowered to get out, and Henrietta is going to make this entire experience the absolute worst, since she is more of a rabid animal rather than a human at this point. We barely managed to escape through the vault door after activating the power switches, now finding ourselves inside the mine. We are so close to freedom we can almost smell it. For the first time in what may have been months, our reagent gets a glimpse of sunlight once again, as we are now outside the Siniala facility and in the desert surroundings. We run off, now free from the horrors of the trials, and the fate of this particular reagent is unknown, but there is much more still going on within the facility. We now jump on board with Clyde Perry in the comics as he talks about his promotion to Director of Historical Refinement a few years ago, but in layman terms, he should just be called the rat catcher, and the rat in question is Amelia Collier. Perry is persistent, and while the Murkoff security have searched the place top to bottom, Perry prefers a more investigative approach. See, he found a breach in Murkoff's security perimeter, access points for scientists who want to observe the trials, intersecting with renovated systems, and he has found clues that Amelia has been here. Whilst he was thorough, it turned out that he was wrong. When Amelia finally triggered the escape, it wasn't through observational access points. Instead, she used the garbage chute and it worked. Murkoff had no idea how many actually escaped, since so many ran out at once. They couldn't catch them all since it was so dangerous and too chaotic. A complete disaster, and no sign of Amelia. It was Perry's fault, and he's been looking in the wrong place this entire time. Perry finds Amelia on the shuttle tracks, pulling a gun out on her. She tells him that Perry won't take her alive before Perry shoots her in the leg. She begins crawling away as Perry calls her stupid, telling her to give up and how she waited too long to make her escape. Amelia corrects Perry, telling him that she's never intended to escape. She's already decided to die here when they killed Damon, and there is nothing that he can do to her. Perry gives off some serious Joker vibes here with this panel, but tells Amelia that he is the one that killed Damon. He asks why Amelia is still crawling away if she isn't trying to escape, but she tells him that she's simply trying to get herself to the other side of her landmine. See, Amelia is using the blind rig. which I use as well. It's a nice choice there, Amelia. It stuns Perry while she uses that moment to hit him in the head with a brick. He falls backwards onto the shuttle tracks, and unfortunately for old Clyde Perry, a shuttle is on the way and slices him in half while Amelia watches on. She attempts to run but is caught by security further down the tunnel, while Perry thinks to himself in his dying moments. He is good at finding people. He is persistent. Eastman arrives telling Perry that he was actually a very good rat catcher, as Perry asks him what he's going to do to get him out of here. Eastman is confused by the question, asking Perry why he never told him what he found in the work order file for the renovation of the shuttle system, since Perry was looking for someone to cast blame on for the breach in Murkoff's security. As you could probably guess, there was no saving Clyde Perry after the horrendous injuries that he sustained from the shuttle. And just like that, our favourite prime asset punching bag has now bit the bullet. Eastman observes a sleeping Amelia, saying that she will now go on display as an example to the other lab rats. We can either get better together, or we can all suffer alone. Clyde Perry is dead, and Amelia has now been captured. Eastman is furious. After all he's done for these reagents, his children, they try to leave him. He decides there is no more rebirth, no leaving him. Sometimes impressionable people make unfortunate friends, but Amelia won't be a problem anymore. This is what freedom looks like. This is what happens when you try to leave him. We can see Amelia now strung up in the main sleep room, assigned to every reagent that you can't escape Eastman. You can't escape Murkoff. The casualty report is for the last 3 days during the entire escape situation here at Sinyala. So between the 21st and the 24th of April, 23 ex-pop have been killed, 27 staff security, 4 of the research staff, 8 of the maintenance staff, and 44 reagents. While the ex-pop's death do seem to be a little high, it is well within standard operating procedure, while security and maintenance losses have been greatly increased due to recent events, especially in regards to attempted investigations into the decommissioned biohazard disposal facility. There is one extremely dangerous member of ex-pop that is still on the loose, presumably Henrietta Grubs, and injuries have been more fatal due to infection and environmental hazards. They believe that the death toll for reagents could possibly be higher, since there are still some accounted for. There is also a report issued to staff about the death of Clyde Perry, stating that he died in the line of duty and a full investigation into his death is now pending. He will continue to hold on to his title of Director of Historical Refinement for the near future until a publicly acceptable cause of death can be designed and released for his surviving family. A meeting takes place between Avellanos, Eastman and Scarfiotti as they discuss how long they plan to keep Amelia strung up inside the sleep room while keeping her alive. Avellanos believes that she should be able to tough it out up there, since she survived so long in the tunnels. Scarfiotti calls her their very own sleep room Jesus, while Eastman points out that she is simply a warning against temptation and sloth. Avellanos brings up the fact that the board is asking about Clyde Perry, with Eastman volunteering to speak to the board. Perry was so fixated on finding Amelia because of his own lapse of judgment that allowed her to escape. It's the sort of irony that the board will appreciate. It won't take much. This stirs up Scarfiotti as Eastman mocks him, saying their focus needs to be on their naughty little reagents. Eastman really is like a completely new person since this whole ordeal. Seems a lot more focused and driven. Can't say that's a good thing. The talks continue as Scarfiotti mentions that Eastman is giving them too much control on the trials. They will now cut corners and they'll get lazy as a result. Eastman believes that by giving the reagents more rope, they'll just simply hang each other. He talks about how amazing it is, what you can learn to enjoy. Avellanos gets them back on track, stating that they need to deal with the reagents that got out, saying that it's a matter of hundreds. Scarfiotti is horrified by the number, but Eastman is quick to mock him again, showing him a bunch of papers. He shows him the case files for reagent 1616, also known as Noth. He was released nearby Sinyala, and Clyde has extensive reports on him, showing that he was very susceptible to activation thanks to his time here in the trials. Eastman states how shockingly charismatic he is, and has been using his charm to assemble a kind of harem, but believes they could be put to better use. He wants Noth to deal with the escaped reagents, since after all, trauma will find trauma. They will encourage a mission for 1616. to give him a narrative and make him a shepherd for a flock of lost little sheep. Scarfiotti asks if he will then kill them or bring them back to Signala, but Eastman tells him to read the brief. He has other plans. I tell you what, that is a great way to set up the events of Outlast 2. It is around this time that Eastman grabs a clipboard with Henrietta Grubs' name on it and mentions how they can't seem to kill this one no matter what they do. So now they will make her better, they will make her beautiful, they will make her free. Showing that Murkoff now have their dirty little hands on her once again, and plans on continuing their testing and experimentation on Henrietta. We end the day with another entry with Eastman. He mentions how he allowed himself to get flustered, but an artist must allow himself a few emotional moments now and then. They have Amelia, and his little bloodhound Perry cornered her, and revealed his loyalty all in the same breath. He makes a comparison on how Perry's job was to grease the rails for Murkoff, and now he is literally greasing the rails. Amelia is now on display, weak and pitiful. After all the lies that she told, she is now telling the truth with her mere existence. If this is what you do, this is what you get. On the 26th, we get sent a letter from Evelanos to Silas Knisley, within the Department of Human Resources at Mount Massive Asylum. She attaches a budget proposal for cooperation between the Signala facility and Mount Massive Asylum, and its sourcing for subjects for Project Lathe, mentioning how the collections department have had some setbacks and wants to discuss with him about a joint human resources initiative between the two facilities. In a handwritten note, Evelanos mentions Clyde Perry's death and how other rumours around Signala are simply exaggerated. They need bodies and Judas goats, and they have a bunch of agency money to spend. Eastman interrogates Reagent 0741, otherwise known as Theo Nordica, showing him a collective complex of unconscious archetypes, an egregore. Eastman believes that Amelia's more committed followers were obsessed with this notion, and believes that they are now at the end of whatever she was planning. He wants to know if there was more, and 0741 might be able to help him understand it. The reagent begins crying, saying how they don't give him his medicine anymore. Eastman asks him again firmly, what is Amelia planning? Eastman takes a much-needed journal entry talking about Reagent 0741. He is one of the few collaborators with Amelia that has been able to be positively identified. Theo Nordica, a masochist and pervert from the southeast with no outside connection with Amelia. Eastman believes him to be very open to conditioning, and that Theo claims to remember absolutely nothing about Amelia's escape and shows all the classic signs of truth-telling. He is worried, saying that Amelia might not realize what she's even set in motion, and he must investigate the sleep room staff. He reflects on the Korean brainwashing that he believed was responsible for his brother's death, realizing that it was just simply a lie. Science is built on sand. We once believed in dragons for thousands of years before the first dinosaur bone was found. It was imaginary, but we were right in the end. Evelanos, Eastman and Scarfiotti meet again. Scarfiotti brings up how writing has been found around the walls, and it's even in Amelia's handwriting. Eastman explains that the reagents are simply emulating her, since they are vulnerable to charismatic influence. They have built Amelia into an imaginary psychopomp. Evelanos proposes to let Amelia embarrass herself by soiling herself while she's strung up, to correct the other reagents' way of thinking, while Scarfiotti is concerned, since the graffiti is going up quicker than the staff can clean it. Eastman believes that the reagents are just hungering for godheads, for leadership. He wants them exposed more to the prime assets, opting to bring multiple prime assets into a single trial. Silas Knisley from Mount Massive finally sends a letter back to Evelanos about the budget proposal that she sent him earlier. He mentions how curious he is about what is going on at the Signala facility, saying that his department was tasked with supplying support for Dr. Vernick's travel to Haiti after he visited that Signala facility. He proposes that he himself may come to Signala if it isn't any trouble. Dr. Newhouse agrees that an exchange of patients could be worthwhile for both facilities, stating that some of their most violent patients are kept chemically restrained at a near catatonic level, but they will slowly reduce dosage to test the behavioural markers that are needed for the Lathe program. He attaches a list of patients before pointing out a young lady that has experience with Dr. Vernick, who he believes they might find interesting. Gottlieb also reaches out to Evelanos, asking her to contact him as soon as possible. He has had a conference with Dr. Kusamura and learned of an extraordinarily provocative chemical advancement within the Signala facility, stating that it is outside the direct purview of Project Lathe, but Kusamura seems to believe that the Cress process could provide a long-term conditioning. Evelanos would meet with Kusamura as he explains that the Cress sister, Aurora Kress, isolated the effect of synthesized mescaline on different receptors of serotonin. They have separated the visual phenomenon from the the altered sense of self and time. Imagine the craziest acid trip that you could ever experience. It allows for non-visual psychedelic effects focused solely on one's self of sense. He calls it the Crest precursor. It creates fissures in the personality that can only be filled in by brainwashing. Avalanos asks what the immediate effects are, which is vomiting, physical weakness, and an overwhelming sense of hopelessness. She tells Kusamura in no uncertain terms. She no longer wants to hear about this research from voices outside of the Sinyala facility any longer. If she hears that he is telling Gottlieb things before he tells her, there will be severe consequences. We get a construction report from Moses Scarfiotti to the board. It mentions how the facility-wide security review has been completed and all vulnerabilities that were exploited by the reagents due to the lapses in protocol from their former head of Department of Historical Refinement, aka Clyde Perry, has now been sealed and hardened. They even left a breach open deliberately during their renovation, inserting reagents into a trial and forcing them to scavenge rigs from bodies. They would then observe which reagents were willing to explore the out-of-bounds area. Staff would then put a note in the files as likely accomplices to Amelia Collier and subjects for increased scrutiny thenceforth. They have also completed construction of the enclosed mall trial environment, as well as attaching security costs associated with containing the Crest Twins' prime asset. He also explains that the substructure of the next trial is underway, with research teams on the way to the site of the original crimes while the weather is still nice. Avalanos and Eastman meet a few days later, talking about the Buffalo Minotaur. Eastman doesn't want the risk of losing any of the twins' time dedicated to lab research, stating that Aurora especially is a genius when it comes to chemicals, pointing to the bufo tenon that she makes from schizophrenic patients' urine. Avalanos isn't a fan of mental patient urine and mentions that Kusamura believes that they would be able to administer the dosage of the Crest precursor more effectively in person. Eastman is committed to inserting them into the trials, since it was actually their original idea, due to the methods that they could develop with political influence and obedient structures, but they had to delay due to Aurora's talents with chemicals. Avalanos believes that if they can show a confluence of narcotic exposure and a political sway, they can milk the CIA for as much as they want. Not to mention, it won't even cut into their chemical experiments, since they only spend about an hour at most doing actual lab work. The rest of the time, they are scratching itches that the other can't reach. Ooh. Dr. Kusamura would go to speak with Otto and Aurora, asking them if they remember the man who brought them here to Murkoff. He shows them pictures of Clyde Perry's body, mentioning how he was split in half. They have no love for Clyde, saying that they only wish that he would suffer no more than the furthest possible limits a man can endure while staying conscious, and are disgusted by the manner of his death, with Otto saying that what God has joined together let no man rend asunder. The two of them begin reminiscing about their father as Aurora begins crying. Kusamura points this out, with Aurora stating that she only has sweet memories of her father. The twins ask Kusamura about what the other thing was that he wanted to discuss, when Kusamura quickly covers his mouth as a chemical cloud fills the room. Otto attempts to run at the doctor but falls unconscious before he can. Kusamura tells them that it's a big surprise, and they'll have to see what it is when they awake, moving Otto and Aurora permanently into the prime asset role within the Lathe program. Best friends Eastman and Scarfiotti also meet. Scarfiotti points out that he believed Eastman insane, but Eastman doesn't want apologies at all, saying that the mall trial is enough. It's beautiful. Scarfiotti states how perfect the shopping mall is for a trial. It's a synthetic environment that gives a sanitized experience of city life, but he's puzzled by the political angle used. Eastman points out that CBS will be televising the presidential debates, and it will change everything. Anything that you put into a store window is for sale. Televisions will turn politicians into products. Commercial television reverses the consumer relationship. Viewers don't buy the programs they watch on the television. Instead, networks rent viewers' eyeballs to their advertisers. They can create a perfect economical cycle, an upward funnel of money and power. Kusamura meets with the Kress Twins, Otto and Aurora, remembering that all of this is spoken in Japanese, as Aurora was able to teach herself Japanese in order to speak with Kusamura while in the R&D department. They're talking about Fritz Haber, a German chemist that received a Nobel Prize in 1918 for being able to synthesize ammonia from nitrogen and hydrogen gas. This would be called the Haber process. This invention would be used for large-scale synthesis of fertilizers and explosives. Apparently, Fritz has corresponded with letters to the Kress Twins, which surprises Kusamura. It was in between the wars, and Fritz had a hard time during the second one. Kusamura is a little starstruck, stating how much of a fan he was of Fritz, calling him an artist and a builder of empires. He asks Aurora if they still have any letters, since he's a collector. He offers them whatever they want, since he has some influence within the facility. Aurora tells him that they've lost the letters. They've lost everything. Their family business did well after the First War, and there are new technologies. Chemical stockpiles needed refilling as they reached out to Fritz, because they heard that he was working on an alternative to methylene deoxymethamphetamine, or otherwise known as MDMA or ecstasy. However, it was only a rumor, but he proved a kind and generous correspondent. The twins viewed him as a mentor. They continue to talk about the subject of the Haber-Bosch process. Kusamura states that it's the greatest creation of the century. Every meal we eat or bomb dropped, every bullet fired, half the population would not even be born, and 99% of murders would not have occurred without this man's work. Only God himself has surpassed him in creation and killing. He asks Aurora what they would speak about. Aurora tells him that they were kindred spirits, stating that they noticed a chemical component in the sentiments growing in Europe prior to the Second War. Kusamura acknowledges this, saying the National Socialist movement, which was all fascism, was a movement based in drugs and fear, and the politics were simply ornamental. Aurora points out that Otto would disagree with him on the matter, but Aurora herself completely agrees with Kusamura's perspective. He tells her that the drug intake among the Nazi leadership was breathtaking, among the soldiers more so. Aurora recalls watching Hitler, a twisted, ugly little drug-addled dwarf that was able to rise to power and conquer. It inspired them. Otto would even watch his rallies with tears in his eyes, believing, why not us? If he can't do it, why can't we? A meeting would take place between Avellanos and Lawler as Lawler attempts to make advances on Avellanos, but she tells him that there will be no more conferences until things calm down. Also, sober Eastman seems to be even more worse than the version of him soaked in gin and amphetamines. Lawler is worried about Kennedy, saying that he just took West Virginia and believes that he will screw them. Avellanos points out that Kennedy is a rich man's son, and money buys votes. However, Murkoff might be able to help, since they have a vector on political will, asking if he's ever heard of Kress Chemical. Lawler brings up the murders in Buffalo, and how authorities tried to tie it to the Kress family, saying how it was just a mix-up, and it was the Kress family's groundskeeper that committed the murders. Avellanos points out that rich people are rarely guilty, telling him that it was actually the only children of the Kress family that committed the murders, and if they had been found guilty, thousands of people would have been out of a job. The entire supply chain would have been out of commission, not to mention Kress Chemical is a major supplier for the US military. Nobody wants Kress out of commission, and so she reached out to Clyde Tolson, an FBI agent that was in the ear of J. Edgar Hoover, and they made a deal with Hoover that they would help cover up the Kress mess in exchange for adding Otto and Aurora to the Murkoff stable. She goes on to ask Lawler a question: who are the most successful politicians in the 20th century so far? He suggests Roosevelt and Churchill. Avellanos states that they were simply men created by a system and tradition that kept the ball rolling, before saying that the most successful politicians in the 20th century were Hitler, Mao, and Stalin. Weird, ugly men with magical beliefs. Each of them is the last guy that you would want to leave alone with your children. Losers, criminals, and failures, but as politicians, all of them unbeatable. Lawler points out that this Kennedy kid is not Hitler, and he isn't ugly, and his politics are about as far from conventional fascism as you could probably get and still hope to win an election. Avellanos corrects him, saying that she isn't talking about politics, she's talking about the politician. Kennedy is a believer, a Catholic, an injured veteran who can't operate without medication. She asks Lawler if he's ever mixed Demerol and methadone, stating that it's incredible, and he probably speaks with Jesus daily. They have a real believer, a real addict in the White House. The sky's the limit. Now they need a political program in Sinala. We now have a write-up about a new archetype called the Jagger by Eastman. It is a relentless hunter that is assigned to a target reagent and will track that reagent until they are dead. This Jagger is the twice repurposed reagent Henrietta Grubs. She was initially interred at the Sinala facility as a patient of Lathe, but after significant physical trauma and a display for remarkable resilience, she was given hormonal treatment and surgeries to increase the length of her bones before being released back into the trials as a heavy ex-pop. She would then again experience remarkable physical trauma after being beaten almost to death by Leland coil and then sent to the biohazard processing. Here, she would survive for months, even after no food source. She would be discovered shortly after during the events of Amelia Collier's escape and was further improved to her current form. She has been fitted with extensive fixators that have been screwed into the bone, offering support, and it also restricts the bone from additional growth, which is a side effect of the hormonal treatment. The Jagger also has a receiver installed that allows instruction and guidance, such as Reagent's targets assigned. The Jagger is a perfect example of the Signala paradox. She finds comfort in hopelessness, and the fixation, shown on one person, has a striking correlation with activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, similar to the MPFC activity seen in a person viewing a potential mate. She is longing for some unattainable love. There is a warning to staff not to refer to the Jagger as Miss Lonely Heart, as it risks contaminating the scientific objectivity in observing scientists. On the 1st of June, Eastman orders Reagent 2427, aka Amelia Collier, to be removed from the sleep room and transported to medical facilities in urgent care. She is experiencing hypoxia and dehydration, and her survival is of the highest priority for Murkoff. Maximum security is to be maintained at all times during transit and during medical care. Avalanos, Eastman, and Scafiotti meet and discuss bringing Kusamura back on site, mentioning how Aurora taught herself Japanese, just so she could talk with Kusamura and discuss chemical science with somebody. Scafiotti states that they couldn't guarantee control and the trial environment couldn't have it, saying that it's too big of a risk after what happened to Amelia. They want to create politicians inside of the trials, thought leaders, and it's something that can be sold to the CIA. We have another journal entry as Eastman gets into his weird talk again, saying how he looked into the face of God and said blink, rewarded with a mirror. He now has a new face, hairless, dead and reborn. It's really just a bunch of jumbled metaphors, but he wonders if Jung would look at what he has built within Signala and see the archetypes thriving. A week later, we get an update on Amelia. She's been smiling in her sleep room, but not from satisfaction. It's like a penitent finding blessing in the church. She's at peace. And this annoys Eastman, wondering what she's seeing behind her closed eyelids. He wonders, maybe there is more pain vectors to explore in paralytic trauma therapy. He can now test the depths of catatonia. Another entry from Eastman has a bunch of scribbles and scratched out letters. He mentions how he rested for 3 hours until the Kress MIVIM has cleared his system. He is attempting to write in his reversed vision, and has been observing himself in the mirror under the influence of MIVIM, and believes it was more rewarding reversed since the image of his reflection was more true than his real body. Bro, Eastman is like the new stoner poster child. What am I reading? He wants to administer Kress formula mirror image visual morphosia to reagents in sufficient dosages to distance their mind from their physical bodies. This will begin the rebirth. Now, during this rebirth, reagents can leave the trial and will now become a sleeper agent for Murkoff and the CIA. We have 8 different newspapers that can be shown as a result of a reagent completing this said rebirth. The first is Wednesday morning of July 16, 1960. 83 people have died in a mid-flight jet airliner explosion as debris sets fire to a Georgetown neighborhood. In the early hours, a Miami flight to New York exploded, killing all passengers and crew on board, including 2 Cuban nationals. The wreckage sets fire to 3 structures in a rural community, and bodies were scattered over an area of 14 acres. The second is also on July 16th as a Teamster leader plunges to his death, presumed to have taken his own life. Police pronounced International Brotherhood of Teamsters Vice President Clifton Red Sherman dead at the scene outside the Griswold Arms Hotel in downtown Chicago. Detectives described Mr. Sherman's hotel room as being in a state of violent disarray, and it was either one hell of a party or as one hell of a fight. Also on July 16th, a foreign minister took his own life and peace talks have now stalled. Geneva officials have declared the death as self-inflicted gunshot wounds to the torso. The tragic death is expected to delay or derail talks between the French government and the Algerian National Liberation Front despite early promises of accord. France has been at war with the guerrilla forces in Algeria since 1954, where separatist rebels have waged a campaign of terror both at home and abroad. The next, also July 16th, is a fire that took place at an institute. Dozens have been killed in the blaze and security measures have now been doubled in the neighbouring prison. The blaze was quick to grow out of control with failures of both telephone lines and localised sirens. When firefighters arrived, they were able to draw water from facilities at neighbouring neighboring Vladimir Central Prison, which is currently holding American spy and pilot Gary Francis Powers. Officials have assured the incident posed no threat to security or operations at the prison. Also on July 16th, the Guatemalan ambassador was detained, but Rosell has been released after evidence mysteriously vanished. Mr. Rosell was arrested at Brussels airport, disembarking from an aeroplane inbound from Beirut. Bulgarian officials promised consequences for the arresting officers after the ambassador was found to be detained on seemingly imaginary evidence. He has since continued on to the embassy in Luxembourg. The final one on the 16th of July, a senator mourns the death of a songstress. The Origin senator and pop star were engaged to be married in June. Senator Gerhardt has announced his intent to retire from the federal government after the shocking death of his fiancée. An author and prominent supporter of voting rights in the American South has declared his intention to get his own house in order. On July 17th, a knife attack happened inside the Vatican. The crazed attacker took their own life after injuring 3. Victims included American Boston's Vicar General and British Auxiliary Bishop, both prominent Catholics in Rome, to prepare draft documents for Pope John XXIII's upcoming Vatican Council. The church released a statement condemning the act and asked for public assistance in recovering the lost documents. And finally, on July 17th, 3 people were found dead in a Beverly Hills mansion after a pact was made. The brother and sister duo first came into prominence in the folk scene in San Francisco's Haight and Ashbury's neighborhood. The two were only 2 weeks away from embarking on a European peace tour that would have included, somewhat controversially, stops in Poland and East Berlin. There are also some endings that we have not yet covered. The first, our Reagent finds themselves in Congo, lined up with numerous other people with a gun to their head while also being questioned. They yell at the group asking who the spy is, asking where the poison is and how you would find Lumumba. They continue to kill people in the lineup and ask what spider eye lamb means. We see Eastman seen as the Skinner Man through the eyes of the Reagent, seemingly activating the Reagent, a visual representation of the phrase taking effect. Things quickly change as the Reagent has seemingly killed the soldiers around them before being shot shortly after. Now, Patrice Lumumba, whom was mentioned, was the leader of the Congolese national movement from 1958 until his eventual assassination in 1961. We know that the Independent Republic of Congo was declared on the 30th of June 1960, with Patrice Lumumba acting as Prime Minister. From the beginning of this independence, the CIA ran operations in the country to stabilize the government and minimize communist influence. The Congo specifically was seen as strategically important to the US due to its size and its natural resources. Patrice Lumumba, however, was seen by the CIA as a potential communist thanks to the CIA Congo Station Chief, Larry Devlin. Devlin would mark Lumumba as a target for covert action, while Lumumba would claim neutrality in the Cold War between the US and Russia, describing himself as a nationalist. As time went on, Washington continued to be unconvinced, and became concerned that Lumumba was too close to the Soviets and feared that the Congo would fall into chaos and turn communist. There have been documents that have been released that show that the CIA had planned to poison Lumumba, with Sidney Gottlieb having a potential part in securing an appropriate vehicle for this would-be assassin. They would ultimately be unable to successfully carry out this assassination attempt, but Lumumba would die after being executed in 1961, something that the CIA have openly stated they had no part in. This would explain the scenario that the Reagent found themselves in, seemingly being one of the assassins sent to kill Lumumba by the CIA, dying by a firing squad, which is interesting since that's actually the same way that Lumumba died in real life. The next ending is where the Reagent awakes in a bed, holding a syringe as a naked man is dying next to them. It seems that the Reagent has overdosed the man, as we can see bags of drugs on the cabinet next to the bed, very similar to the bags of drugs created within the dock environment at Murkoff. As we leave the room, we can see many posters and prints on the table that show nuclear weaponry and even a picture of Mao. There is a knock on the door as we open it. We can hear the trigger word spider eye lamb as Eastman, seen as the Skinner Man through the eyes of the Reagent, reclaims his agent's mind. This ending is a little bit harder to place as well, but a few things seem obvious. Firstly, the person that the Reagent has overdosed seems likely to be a nuclear scientist during the Mao era of China. We can also see astrology books on the table, which makes me think that this could be connected to the 2 bombs 1 satellite Chinese nuclear weapon and artificial satellite development program that ran in China. This would lead to China's first thermonuclear detonation in 1964. There were also CIA programs that took place specifically in the Tibet region aimed at countering communist expansionism and influence in Asia during the Cold War, not to mention that the CIA viewed Mao Zedong's communist regime as a major geopolitical adversary during the Cold War as well. It wouldn't be much of a surprise to see a reagent sent to seemingly seduce and kill someone working on such a program for the communist regime that the CIA was concerned about. And with that, we are now up to date with all of the new lore and information that has been released regarding Outlast Trials, and are now also up to date with our timeline. If you got to the end of the video, put Team Amelia or Team Murkoff, depending on who you're rooting for, so I can see. If you like the video, please consider leaving a like, as it helps out the channel immensely, and remember to subscribe for more content in the future. I appreciate all the support so much, guys. See you guys next time. Peace.